it's worth us having a definition of mindfulness. So I've pulled this one from the Mindful Nation UK report in 2015, in that mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment to what's happening in the mind, the body, and the external environment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. So let's just unpick that a little bit further. And really, the top 3 bullet points here are the 3 aspects of mindfulness that are most important within that definition. So first of all, it's a way of noticing what is happening moment to moment. And in terms of in the classroom, it's something like paying attention. It's noticing what's happening. You're paying attention to what's happening, but every single moment to moment. So not thinking about the future or what's next or what are you doing after this webinar or the fact that you haven't yet completed your planning for tomorrow and should you really be sitting here. So really noticing in this moment, how are things? And by doing that, it's a way of training the attention. So very much about attention. Where is your attention now? Is it outside the room? Is it here? Is it on me? Is it on the computer? Is it on that niggle in your back that you're a bit uncomfortable on the seat? So where is your attention? But we do all this with a particular attitude. And the attitude is one of curiosity, of openness and non-judgmental. And this is really important when working with teenagers. If you find that in your classroom you start using some mindfulness practices, it's really important to be open and non-judgmental about it and encourage teenagers to be the same, to do the same. So in the secondary context in particular, there can be a little bit of silliness, a bit of closed attitude towards it. And so there's this idea of openness and just giving things a go and seeing what happens is quite helpful. The last 3 bullet points, so it can be a useful life skill. You can use it in many different contexts. There is an evidence base behind it, which I will talk about briefly. And for some people, it can really be a massive change to them once they start practicing mindfulness, and it can become a whole way of being. So in everything that you do, you notice when your mind is wandering. You notice whether you're worrying about tomorrow or stressing about something that's just happened. And by noticing, it's the first step to being able to respond in a more skillful way. So those are all things that mindfulness is. Let's perhaps pause a moment and think now about what it isn't. And I want to take you through a few of these things. And these are quite important, really, if you're working in secondary schools and thinking of bringing mindfulness into your classroom or into your own practice in secondary. So mindfulness does have its roots in Buddhism. The practices that form the basis of mindfulness are from the Buddhist practices. However, you don't have to deliver it in a religious way. And there are now secular practices and secular courses. And so it does not need to be seen as being a religious thing that you're bringing into the classroom. Whilst there are mindful yoga practices, and you can do yoga within a mindful way, and they can be very closely linked, mindfulness is not just yoga. In many cases with young people I've worked with, when you ask them what mindfulness is, and they say, well, you have to sit cross-legged with your hands on your knees and hold your fingers like this and then chant. Okay, so there's often misconceptions around what mindfulness is, and yoga is often one of those that's up there quite high. It isn't therapy. Not in the way that we would be using it in the classroom. It can be used in a therapeutic context, but because you might be using mindfulness or practicing it yourself, it does not mean that you are using it in that therapeutic way. Boring. Now, mindfulness can sometimes be incredibly boring, but it's quite important to recognize what boring is and what it isn't. And so really, it doesn't have to be boring. In fact, it can be incredibly hard, which brings us on to that next one. It's just relaxing. Mindfulness is not about relaxing. In fact, if we're practicing mindfulness, it can be incredibly difficult to keep your attention on one thing and notice when it's wandering away and bring it back to where you intend it to be. So it can be quite hard, almost a mental workout when you're practicing mindfulness. Now, people often say, well, isn't mindfulness just breathing? Well, we do focus on the breath quite a lot, and that's important because our breath can be a way to switch our nervous system into a rest and digest state rather than a very anxious or stress-fueled fight, flight or freeze mode. And so by breathing, we can help our body shift into that different mode, into one of being and of resting and digesting. And so the breath really can be an anchor for us, a place to put our attention that can be quite helpful. However, for some young people, focusing on the breathing can be difficult. So you don't have to focus on the breath. We can focus instead on the hands or on the feet. And one of the practices I'll explain later can do exactly that. And it's important to look at that final one there. Mindfulness is not always the solution. Some people really just don't suit it. They find it very difficult to practice. It's not really their thing. Many people say that before actually trying it out. Remember that attitude of openness and non-judgmentalism. So hopefully encouraging people to try things before they judge whether or not it is for them. But it's definitely not always the solution. Some young people will need further support. Some teachers will need further support or different strategies to support them with resilience.